Well, welcome to this Dialogue Extra. I'm here with Fredrik Logevall. He's a professor at Harvard University and the author of Embers of War, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 2013 for its look at the antecedents to the Vietnam War, dating back to when the French were involved. I'm going to talk right now more, though, about history and the teaching of history, because although you're a historian and you've written this volume, you teach it as well. And it seems to me that there's been some interesting changes, trends in the teaching of history, or the lack thereof, in our country. For instance, universities, some of them are dropping their requirement to have undergraduates take at least one course in history. I assume that you would have some pushback on that and want there to be some core requirement that people take a history course in college.
Yeah, I believe it's of profound importance for our young people, and actually for all of us, to have a historical sensibility, to know something about this nation's history and also global history. And so I'm troubled by this trend, and I, like you, I've seen it around the country, where institutions are either dropping the requirements or making it easier for people to use, say, their AP credits from high school as a substitute, and will, partly I think from my disciplinary home, which is history, but also I think from my work as a historian, defend the utter imperative, the imperative nature, the utter importance of studying the past in order to have a better understanding of where we are as a society, where we are individually, but also as a society and as a nation, and therefore where we might be going to the future. It's of just crucial importance.
So that you can, for instance, if you're a voter, assess candidates' issues better?
Yeah, no question. No question. I think that in order to be able to judge what candidates will say in a given election, to be able to judge his or her platform, his or her statement of policy priorities, you need to have an understanding of where this is coming from. Because I think that pretty much all decisions in rational politics come from an understanding or an assessment of the past and how it can be applied to the here and now and to the future. History is at the very essence of policy in that respect, and that's why we need to teach it.
And as I understand it, there's also been a movement within those who teach history to not just teach it perhaps the way that you and I learned it, as a series of facts that were memorized and dates and important people, but that the very process of thinking about the past, just that pedagogical, instinct, that helps us when we learn to think about the past.
Yeah, it's quite true, and I'm I think guilty, as are other historians, other professors, of being in the past at least too tied to a kind of straight lecture style where you impart all kinds of information to students. You expect them to then absorb that information and on their midterm and on their final to spit it back to you. There is a place for lecturers. I have no doubt, because there's a debate about this among teaching researchers, that the lecture and the lecture course has a place in the curriculum, and I'm convinced by that. But even in that lecture course, we can do things, I think, in a more imaginative way. We can think about new ways to get students to think about the past and learn from the past. One of the things that I did in my class at Harvard just last week, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, for the first time in my career, I had a simulation. What we did was I was Lyndon Johnson without the Texas accent, because I can't do that. I wish I could do it. I would have been there, in full force. But I played the role of LBJ. And then I had 8 teams, or 8 advisors, all in the room, and they got dressed up for this. So the men in the class were in suits and jackets. And everybody looked great. But I had 8 advisors.
Were they all men?
No, no, no.
Okay.
Well, all the advisors are men, yes.
Because they were.
They were. And this is
Yeah.
I chose April 30th, 1965 on the Vietnam decision. So Robert McNamara, Dean Rusk,
Yes.
McGeorge Bundy, Ambassador Taylor, Richard Russell, a number of players. And then because I have obviously more than 8 students in the class, there were basically 4 or 5 students per person, if that makes sense. Then we had this simulation. And I said to them, what should I do in Vietnam? And I pressed them, well, that doesn't work. You're contradicting what so-and-so said over here. And how do you defend this? And what would you do if this happens? I think it was fun. I think it had great pedagogical utility. I don't want to do it too often, but I came away from that experience thinking, yes, to really make the messiness of the past come alive for students, to better help them in case some of them are going to be policymakers in the future, think about the choices that they have to make, including on the spot. I think it was really valuable. So
And maybe seeing the fact that it was all men, that's another aha moment for some students, that there were no women advisors, and that's
yes.
changing.
Changing. I think some
so-
students commented on this to me both before we started and after the fact. Did you notice? And of course we all noticed. And, you know.
And all white.
Yes. Oh, certainly.
So.
And even if you go back then in this particular case, and you look at the decision making by Lyndon Johnson at the time, and I don't want to get too, what's the word, gendered about this, but the tenor of the discussion, the words used back in 1965, there was a kind of machismo element to this. You know, what would a real man do in this case? And what will my opponents think of me if I don't do this? It's not to say that a female president or a set of female advisors would have chosen differently, but it had there was a very male-centric quality,
yes,
not just to who was there, but to the discussion.
Yes, and the story about what he did do machismo-wise to journalists to prove his point.
To journalists,
Look
yes.
it up, but he certainly disrobed,
Yep.
at least partly.
Yep.
I'm also thinking, Professor, though, about the process of studying history. When people, I remember as a 6th grader, I was assigned to look up the history of my elementary school.
Uh-huh.
And so, you went to the archives, you looked at old photographs, and it got me more excited about history because it came to life through these methods. And I'm also thinking about that, like if you learn the process of history, it's applicable to
There's no question.
exciting you about other things.
There's no question about this, and I think your example of you as a 6th grader is a really interesting one. And I think it speaks to something that I think shows the value of history. If you were to say to me, why should we do this? I think that among other things, history helps us to see patterns in a way that I think can be really useful. And even the little example that you just gave can teach a student the patterns that would lead to a development and then to an expansion of a school and of a curriculum and the kinds of students who would attend that school. And I think it's a very useful skill to have, whatever our profession, whatever our path in life, to be able to see patterns. And the other thing that history, I think, teaches us is that not everything is new under the sun. And so when political candidates, for example, say that this is unprecedented, this has never happened, we can be skeptical. And then we can say, well, no, actually, there are some analogs. We can analogize here from this experience in the past if we have done some of that history. It doesn't require that we all become PhDs or that we all have a super deep working in history and knowledge of history, but it's important for us, therefore important for our students, to have history as part of their curriculum, I believe.
I know what it did is it got me interested in documentaries and
well, there you go.
Because you find these pictures and this old audio and film, and it's just so intriguing how you can put the past together again visually.
Yeah, you can. And there's one other thing that I would add, if I might. The study of history can if not inoculate us against, it can help guard against the kind of superficial reading of the past, in which, it teaches this simple lesson, and because it worked that way in the past, it'll work that same way today and tomorrow. And I think this is a very valuable thing that history brings. It is not, I think, often an easy predictor of the future. I think that's what you learn when you study history.
Right, because I think some students might think, and people in general, that all the answers have been determined, and there's, like you said, there's nothing new under the sun. We know about the Civil War, we know about the Revolutionary War, and when in fact we're still finding new veins of knowledge, particularly with multiculturalism and different lenses through which people look at history. Slave narratives, female narratives,
no question.
just exploded since
Yeah.
you and I grew up, and since you took, went into the teaching profession.
Oh, no question.
I know it's a big question, but how has this increased emphasis on multiculturalism and all these different ways of looking at something affected what you do? Is it too much sometimes, or is it revelatory and helpful?
I think it's been extremely revelatory. I think it's been important. If we're talking for a moment just about the American experience, let's limit this to the United States and its history. This explosion of scholarship in so many different areas, as you suggest, I think has been hugely important. And I'm also, among other things, a co-author of a textbook. It's called A People and a Nation. And to work with my co-authors on that project and to see and to bring into this book, that is after all a book between two covers, the best of this new scholarship has just been so important in terms of our a richer, deeper, more exciting, if you will, understanding of the American past, which is really extraordinary. Ironically, in terms of my own work, which is of course more focused on foreign policy, on high politics, on diplomacy, maybe it's had less of an impact for the reason we said before. Up until recently, it was very male-centric. And it tended to be what we now call dead white guys who were making these decisions. But even for me, as a diplomatic historian and as a foreign relations historian, I think this richer, fuller picture of our nation's past has made my own work much better.
As you know, though, there are school boards, states that take umbrage at this sometimes and will censor or even not purchase certain textbooks because they feel that they are too liberal in their view. The multiplicity of views is not to their liking. Didn't you?
Yeah, and I respect that we have multiple views on this in this country, and that people who have that particular point of view feel very strongly about it. I would simply say, based on what I know about our own textbook and what I know about the work that's being done by others, is that I think it is not perfect, no history can be, but that it represents many of the great parts of the American past. But it also, I think, proceeds from an understanding that we need to also not turn a blind eye to those chapters in our nation's history that are more negative, that are difficult in many respects to really grapple with. We have to have that in there as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the extra time to talk with me about history. I really appreciate it. You've been listening to Professor Fredrik Logevall. He teaches at Harvard University. His book, Embers of War, won the Pulitzer Prize in History in 2013. For our full discussion, check out the Dialogue website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin.